We've had a look at the photometric standard 3ds Max light, so now let's have a look at the mental ray lights that are available in 3ds Max. So let's go ahead and create them. First, I'm going to take this photometric standard 3ds Max light that I created before, and I'm just going to delete it, get rid of it. I'll go back to the Create menu, go to Lights, I'll go to Standard Lights, and down here we only have two standard lights for mental ray, an area spot and an area omni. So let's go ahead and create the area spot. Okay, let's go ahead and click and drag here, create our interest point there. Alright, I'll hit W on the keyboard to activate the move tool here and move this thing up. And let's hit 2 on the keyboard to open up the modify panel over here and start to adjust some parameters. Now, about 90% of the parameters associated with these mental ray area lights are the same as the parameters that we had for the standard 3ds Max lights we looked at a couple of videos back. For example, we can switch the light type from spot to directional, omni, and so on. Okay, we can turn the targeted mode on or off. We can turn the light on or off. Here's the shadows parameters, same as before. Okay, we can also look at the intensity here. We can change the multiplier. We can add some inverse square fall off. We can also change the color, and I think you get the idea. So what is the difference between a standard 3ds Max light and a mental ray area light? In this case, a mental ray area spotlight. Well, the difference is that the mental ray area light has different types of shadows. It uses area shadows, or mental ray area shadows, I should say. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's do a render here. Okay, and it's a pretty dark render, so let's go over here to the intensity multiplier. Let's increase that maybe to 5. Let's render again. Just trying to get pretty good intensity. Still a little bit dark, not too bad though. Let's go with maybe 8. And then I'm just going to be happy and leave it at 8. You know what, that's good enough. Okay, so here's my light here with shadows. And if I look at my parameters here, I'm using ray trace shadows, which is just fine. Alright, and I have spotlight parameters here. I've got advanced effects, so on and so forth, which are pretty common parameters across all lights in 3ds Max, whether they're mental ray lights or 3ds Max lights. They're pretty common. But I do have area light parameters down here. And this area light parameters rollout is only available when you're working with this mental ray light. So these are mental ray area light parameters here. Okay? Now, we can turn these area lights on or off. We'll leave it on, which is the default. We can also show the icon in the renderer. What that means is that if I turn that on, if I go ahead and render this out, we can see a small icon there. It's a little bit difficult to see from this angle. So let's do this. Let's change our viewpoint here so we're looking at the light itself, looking at the front of the light. And if we render this out, you can see the actual light shape here, which is a rectangle right now, or a square. And that's because the type here is selected as rectangle. We can select between rectangle and disk. If we switch to disk and we go ahead and do a render, you're going to notice now that the light shape is actually in the shape of a disk. And the shape of the area light actually will determine and change the way that the shadows look in the scene. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom out a little bit here. Look at this from this angle here. Okay, so you have the option to show the light when you render out, or to make it completely invisible when you render out. So you get the light effect, but you don't actually see the shape of the light. You can also change the radius here. If I close this, by changing the radius, you can see an icon inside our viewport that's a cyan color. And let me just move my camera view here. You can see it there when I start to change the radius here. As I lower the radius, you can see it gets smaller. As I increase the radius, it gets larger. When I let go or I move away from this radius parameter and I stop adjusting it, it disappears and becomes invisible, but it's still there. Okay? The size of that radius is going to determine the size of the shape when we render this thing out. So if I go ahead and render this out with a size of 10 centimeters here, 10.3 centimeters, you see that we get a pretty large shape here. If I lower the size down by a good amount, you notice that the shape becomes much smaller. Okay, so let's leave it like that. Down here we have samples for the U and the V. This is basically the width and the height of the area light. The more samples you have, the higher quality the shadows are going to be, but the longer the render is going to take. Okay, so if I come in here and I zoom into behind one of these spheres or so on and so forth, and I render this out, you're going to see that I have these nice area light shadows. Now, area light shadows are photorealistic. They're realistic in the sense that they behave the way that shadows behave in the real world. this is how shadows behave in the real world. When a shadow is cast very close to the object that's casting it, and in this example, this object here, you notice that the shadow is very sharp and very defined. As the shadow gets farther and farther away from the object, the shadow becomes softer and softer and less defined, less distinct. This is the way that shadows behave in real life. This is the way that area shadows are programmed in computer graphics to work, to mimic and create photorealistic shadowing inside of computer programs, in this case 3ds Max and Mental Ray. Okay, now if I move a little bit more over here, let me do another render here so we can see the shadow really good. Okay, here's the blurry part here. Looks pretty decent in the video. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in pretty close, and I'm going to render this out again. Okay, and let me actually move my camera just a bit, render this out again. Okay, there we go. That's an excellent angle. You can see that there's a bit of graininess here when we render this out. There's a little bit of graininess associated with this area light, and that's the problem with area lights. You're going to get this graininess and this artifacting with the area light shadows. To fight that aliasing, to fight that artifacting, what you have to do is increase the amount of samples for the area light. Problem is, by increasing the samples, yes, you do fix the quality problem, but you do increase your render time by quite a bit. Now, before 3ds Max 2010, you had to come into every individual area light and change these sample parameters on a light per light basis. So if you had 20 of these lights in your scene, guess what? You're going to go to 20 different lights and you're going to have to change the parameters for each, which is a really bad way of working. It's very slow, very cumbersome, and not a very good efficient way of working. Fortunately, in Max 2010, we now have a global parameter to control that, and that's right here in the soft shadows precision parameter set down here. As you can see right now, it's set to 1x, which is the default. If I lower it to say something very low to 0.125x or times, and it's very low, I can go ahead and render this out. It's going to render out much faster, but you can see there's a ton of artifacting. This is good for doing preview rendering, but obviously for a final production render, you can't turn this into a client or to your studio boss. This is just unacceptable. So what you want to do is increase this precision, the soft shadows precision, to something higher. We can go to high quality, which is 2 times as good as the default. We can go to high quality, which is 4 times. We can go to an even higher quality, which is 8 times, and we can go to very high quality, which is 16 times. And if we go with very high quality, you notice the render takes a little bit longer. Actually, it takes a lot longer, as you can see. But when it finishes rendering, we're going to get the best quality shadows for the area light. Now, if you take a look down here at the lower left of the 3ds Max interface, we'll see that down here it says rendering time about 2 seconds down here. Okay, that's the previous render time when I was doing the very high artifact, very low quality preview renders. It was taking about 2 seconds. Okay, this one's taking a lot longer, and when it's finished, it's going to update down here and tell us what the new render time is. I'm just going to pause the video so you don't have to watch this, and we'll be able to skip forward here to the end of this render. Alright, so I finished rendering here. We can see that the render is artifact free. Looks fantastic actually. The area shadows here are very smooth and they're artifact free, high quality, but that came at a very expensive render time. Our render time jumped from 2 seconds to, as you can see down here, 4 minutes and 7 seconds. That is a huge, huge increase in render time. Okay, so you want to be very careful about how you use this global shadows precision parameter here. I suggest leaving it at the default. If you leave it at the default, you still get pretty fast renders, and although they're not totally artifact free, they look pretty good. And it only took about 3 seconds to render this out, as it says down here. So it's pretty nice, pretty good. Okay, so there you go. You no longer have to control the samples here. You can just use the global modifier, global controls here, which is a lot easier and a lot faster to use. So I strongly recommend you take advantage of it. Okay, so that's the way that the area light works, the Mental Ray area light. Now there's only 2 types of Mental Ray area lights. Okay, there's the spotlight and the Omni light. Now if we go here to the general parameters, you notice that by default this light was targeted. It didn't give us the choice of choosing a free area spotlight. It was a targeted area spotlight by default. If you prefer to have a free area spotlight, just go ahead and uncheck that option there, and there you go. Now you have yourself a free mental ray area spotlight. So what I'm going to do is delete that light. I'm going to go back to the create menu, go to lights. Let's go to standard lights, and let's go to mental ray area Omni. Let's go ahead and create one of these lights here. I'm just going to move it above like this. Go to the modify panel here and start making some changes to this. So I'll give it some inverse square fall off, and I'll do a render. And there we go. It's a very nice light, as you can see. These area lights are fantastic for when you're trying to do photorealistic renders and trying to do some renders that look like digital photography in a controlled environment. They're beautiful lights. They're very realistic. They actually render out pretty fast, so long as you don't go crazy with these soft shadows, precision settings down here. Keep it at a pretty high quality here, at 2 times high quality, or 2x. It's pretty good. Okay, default's pretty good for preview renders, as you can see, and don't go too crazy with it and go really high to like 16x or even 8x. That's just overkill, and you're just gonna needlessly increase your render time by drastic amounts. Okay, so all the parameters are still the same with the area Omni light. If we go down here to the area light parameters, same thing. We have the on parameter here. Now we do have a different shape. Instead of choosing 2D shapes like a rectangle and a cylinder, or a disc, we actually have 3D shapes. So we have a sphere and a cylinder. So we'll take the sphere here, we'll tell it to show the icon in the renderer, and if we go ahead and render this out, now we'll be able to see the sphere. Editor, edit that out of the video. There was a truck or something in the background. Start again in 3, 2, 1. Editor, there was still a truck in the background. Edit that out of the video. Starting again in 3, 2, 1. So when we render this out, we can see that there's a sphere in our scene here, and the sphere actually represents the area light itself. Okay, we can change the shape from a sphere to a cylinder if you like to. So we can go ahead and render that out again, and here's the cylinder. All right, we can also change the shape of the cylinder or the height and certain parameters. So let's close this. Let's go ahead and change the radius here, and you can see the icon of the viewport appears when we interactively change the radius. So we'll make it a very thin radius, and we'll increase the height. So we'll make this long, so it looks almost like a fluorescent light tube. Okay, and then what we can do is we can actually rotate this light, put it sideways like so. If we have a look at that light tube, right there, it's sideways, and we'll go ahead and render this out again. And you notice now the way that the shadows look. So this is great if you're doing any type of photorealistic rendering, when you have to do some kind of light like this for an architectural visualization, some kind of an interior scene or something like that, where you're doing maybe a hotel lobby or some kind of industrial interior space, anything like that. These area lights from Mental Ray actually work simply fantastic for those kinds of situations. Okay, so that's pretty much going to do it for the area light. We're going to go ahead and end this video here, and editor, edit that out of the video. We got to talk about the photometric area light, the sky portal. So in this video here, not in this video here, just edit that stuff out of the video, starting in 3, 2, 1. So that's going to do it for this area light here. With this area light selected, I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I'm going to go to the create menu here. I'm going to go to lights. I'm going to go to photometric lights, and now I'm going to go to the MR sky portal, the Mental Ray sky portal light. Editor, edit that out of the video. There was a truck in the background again. I think it's finally gone. Okay, so let's start again. 3, 2, 1. So let's go ahead and create this sky portal light. And what you want to do is drag, click and drag, and you can change the size of the portal light. You can see it's a 2D shape, like a rectangle, and you can make this size whatever you need to. So I'll just go with any size there. Right click to end the selection. And I'm just going to move it, kind of place it right over my scene here. Okay, you notice that the icon has an arrow to it. The arrow is pointing in the direction of the light. So behind it over here where there is no arrow, there's going to be no light. So that the light's actually pointing down, which is exactly what I want in this case. Of course, if I wanted the light to go up, I can always rotate this and flip it around. But that's not what I want. So I'll just go over here to edit, and so I'll just go ahead and rotate this back and make this face back down again the way it was before. Okay, I'll hit 2 on the keyboard to go to the modify panel, and we have ourselves some specific parameters here just for the portal light. Okay, so we have some Mentoray Skylight portal parameters. Alright, we've got ourselves a multiplier here. Now, one thing to note is that we don't have a parameter here for changing the fall off, the decay. That's because by default, this light already has decay built in. Just like the standard photometric lights from 3ds Max, this Mentoray photometric light already has the decay built in. So you don't have to worry about setting that up. Let's go ahead and do a render here. This is what we get. It's obviously too dark at the moment, so let's increase that multiplier to something like maybe 10. See what we get. Run that out again. It's still too dark. Now you notice that no matter how much we increase this multiplier, I mean, we could increase this to 1,000 if we wanted to, and if we render this out again, it's still going to come out black. Why is that happening? The reason it's happening is because of a default option under the advanced parameters rollout. Okay, if we come down here, we have a color source. This color source is a very important parameter. And I'll show you why it's so important right now. By default, it's set to use existing skylight. What does that mean? Well, later on in this tutorial, we're going to be working with the Mentoray Sky Shader. Okay, so don't worry about that now. Later, you'll get to see what that is, and you're actually going to like that shader and that lighting system a lot. So what this means is that by default, this light is using or trying to use that Mentoray Skylight Shader to determine its light intensity. Okay? The problem is we don't have a Mentoray Skylight Shader set up in this particular scene, so of course we're just going to get complete darkness. So what we can do is we can use a custom environment, which we're not going to use scene environment, and the scene environment is determined. If I hit 8 on the keyboard to open up the environment effects window here, this is what determines the scene environment. This button right here, it says environment map. If I had, say, a bitmap, maybe an image of an HDR, high dynamic range image, you'd be able to use that. But we're not going to do that right now. Or we can use custom, which is set to none. You can actually click here and you can actually plug something in. You can plug in different types of maps and images, things like that. We're just going to leave it to none. And now if we go ahead and render this out, you're going to notice that our light's back. Perfect. Now it's too bright because I had set it to a multiplier of 1,000. So let's go to something like 10, which I think was the default. Let's go ahead and render it out. You can see the light right there. Actually, it's a beautiful light, but it's too dark. So let's go ahead and maybe go to like something like 50. Looks a little bit brighter and nicer. Still doesn't look too bright. Let me just go to 100 here and say that I'm happy with that. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Okay, so here's the Mentoray Sky Portal light. It's an excellent light. You can use it by itself the way I'm using it here, or you could use it coupled with the Mentoray Skylight Shader, which we're going to look at the Skylight Shader later. We're going to dedicate a whole chapter just to that. Okay, so what parameters do we have with this? Well, we have a filter color. Normally, this light gets its color from the Sky Shader or an environment shader that you plug in. If you're using your own custom environment shader, you would use this option down here. It says use scene environment. If you're using a Mentoray Skylight Shader, you would select the first option, which is the default, use existing skylight. Okay, we're going to stick with custom for now. We can turn on the visible to renderer option here. It works the same as the other Mentoray area lights, where turning on visibility makes the light actually visible inside of the render. So if I change my camera angle so I'm looking up at the portal light and I render this out with the visible to renderer option turned on, you can see the actual light up here. Okay, if I turn that off and I render again, you won't be able to see the light anymore. So you have the choice there of how you want it. Okay, this option here, it says flip light flux direction. Just flips the direction that the light's going in. So I can flip it to so it's facing up or it's facing down, whatever I want. I can go ahead and change the dimensions of the light so I can make it thin or wide or whatever I really want. I can do whatever I want with this. So I can render this out and it'll look a little bit different based on the size there. If I make the size larger, the light actually becomes brighter because there's more light coming into our scene from this portal light. As you can see here, I made it larger. Now it looks a little bit brighter. It's a very nice, soft, realistic light. Okay. I can also turn shadows on or off. Okay. And I can increase the shadow samples. Increasing the shadow samples to higher amounts is going to create higher quality shadows. If I come in here and I zoom into some of these objects and I render out again, you're going to see that the shadows here have a lot of artifacting. That's because my shadow samples are set to only 16. If I set it to 2, I'm going to get a lot of artifacting, but I'm also going to get faster renders. It's the same deal as with the area light from before that we were looking at. You get a lot of artifacting with less samples. If you want less artifacting, you're going to have to increase those samples by a high amount. I recommend leaving it at the default of 16 and using the global controls here to control the quality of your soft shadows. So here you can see by using the global control and going to high quality, which is 4x, I get myself pretty nice quality shadows. If I go down to something like low and I render out again, I get myself these artifact heavy shadows that are just the preview quality right now for rendering out faster. Okay, so there we go. That's that. And again, we get our filter color here, which we can use to change the color of the light. If I go ahead and give it a green filter, I'm going to get a greenish tone of a light here, greenish hue. Okay, just going to go back to the default, hit OK. All right. Then we have this from outdoors parameter here for shadows. If we turn it on and hit render, we're not going to see much of a difference here. That's because this parameter actually controls shadows coming from objects that are outside the portal light. So sometimes you have a scene where there's objects that are outside this portal light, say out here to the side or back here somewhere, and you want that to cast shadows. You can turn on the from outdoors parameter. I don't recommend you use it, however, because it's going to add extra shadows to your scene, which will of course increase rendering time, and usually that's not what you want, but the option is always there for you to choose whatever you like. Okay, so that's pretty much going to do it for the parameters here for the mental ray portal light. So that's going to do it for all the mental ray standard as well as the only photometric light from mental ray here, the sky portal light, and that's going to do it for this video. So we'll continue with some more parameters and different tools here with mental ray in the next video.